What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in this video, I'm going to be going through my Week 15 quarterback start sits. So, talking about every single starting quarterback of all 16 Week 15 games, listing them as either a start, fringe option, or a sit. The starts are going to be the quarterbacks you would trust as your mid to high end QB1s. The fringe options, more of your back end QB1s to high end QB2s, and then sits, players you would prefer to keep on your bench. Unfortunately, the quarterback position just continues to get hit hard with injuries. We're going to see that in the Thursday night game here with the Chargers taking on the Raiders. It looks like Justin Herbert's going to have surgery on his broken finger, so very unlikely he plays here on Thursday night. So we're going to get Easton Stick versus Aiden O'Connell on Thursday Night Football. Not what I was expecting, but pretty clear here fantasy-wise. Going to be sitting both of these guys. Not a great game. Probably going to be a pretty tough one to watch. The next game, we have the Vikings taking on the Bengals. And I mean, for the Vikings here, got quarterback controversy. You got Josh Dobbs starting the game. Didn't make it all the way through. Nick Mullins comes in. They end up winning 3-0. So both these guys are going to be sits. You can't trust either of these guys to finish a game. And even if they, would have played the full game, the production probably wouldn't have been there fantasy-wise. For the Bengals, I have Jake Browning as a fringe option. Back-to-back really strong games. Not a great matchup here against this Vikings defense that has really improved over the second half of the season, but I still think Browning is playable as like a fringe QB1 option. In the next game, we're going to have the Steelers taking on the Colts. I'm going to be sitting both of these quarterbacks. Mitch Trubisky, not super surprising here. Didn't look great against the Patriots, and just not a guy you want to be starting in the fantasy playoffs. And then for the Colts, Gardner Minshew hasn't been terrible over the past few weeks, but I just feel like there's not a ton of ceiling. The floor is pretty low, and with no teams on bye, I just think you're going to be able to find better options at the quarterback position. Some of those better options could be in this Broncos Lions matchup. For the Broncos, Russell Wilson just kind of continues to deliver that like high-end QB2 production, so he's going to be a fringe option for me. Also like the matchup going up against this Lions defense that has really not been great over the second half of the season, especially against quarterbacks and wide receivers for fantasy. Then for the Lions here, going to have Jared Goff as a fringe option, coming off a pretty rough game against the Bears here, but it was a tough weather game a little bit. He's been fine overall in the season, so I still think he's a decent, like high-end QB2 play this week. Could see a bounce back there against the Broncos. Pretty rough divisional matchup here with the Falcons taking on the Panthers. Desmond Ridder actually coming off of a solid fantasy game, but no interest in actually considering playing them in like normal size leagues. And then for the Panthers here, Bryce Young, just a locked in sit every single week. We're going to have the Bears taking on the Browns, and I think Justin Fields is a locked in start. Very strong QB1 rest of season. He has really picked up his play over the second half, getting super involved on the ground, using his legs, racking up that rushing production. But he's also been very solid as a pass catcher, just force feeding DJ Moore at this point. So you got to feel good about Justin Fields. Browns defense, was really tough early on. Haven't been as great over the past couple of weeks, but I still think they're, somewhat of a tough matchup, but Fields should be fine fantasy-wise. And then for the Browns, I have Joe Flacco as a fringe option. This Bears defense has been tougher, but just due to the injuries, across the board at the quarterback position, I think if you have to play Flacco, you'll be fine. They're not really trying to protect the ball with him. They're letting him go out there. They're letting him sling it 40-plus pass attempts in back-to-back games. I like Flacco as like a high-end QB2 this week. Then we're going to have the Buccaneers taking on the Packers. For the Buccaneers, Baker coming off a decent fantasy game. Overall in the season, though, he's more of a mid to back end QB2, so not overly interested. For the Packers, I have Jordan Love as a fringe option. Pretty disappointing Monday night game fantasy-wise. Had a decent matchup, was riding a hot streak coming into it. Didn't necessarily come through. I think it's a decent matchup here against this Buccaneers defense. Secondary's been suspect here for the Bucks, so I think Jordan Love is a nice fringe option. I think you could even argue a start if he gets Christian Watson back. No Christian Watson, I think it's tough to make that argument, but with his top weapon back, could be an interesting option. We're going to have a divisional matchup between the Jets and the Dolphins. Zach Wilson coming off a very impressive game in Week 14. He's still going to be a sit for me. We can't throw away everything we've seen over the entire season, but it was nice to see, especially for these other weapons, but specifically at the quarterback position, definitely not going to be playing Zach Wilson. For the Dolphins here, I currently have Tua as a fringe option. Now, not a great game in Week 14 on Monday night. I think his status here is going to come down to Tyreek Hill's injury. So Tyreek Hill with that ankle, he did end up coming back into that Monday night game, but he was kind of in and out of the lineup. You don't know how that ankle is going to feel a day or two later. So if Tyreek Hill is out against this Jets defense, their secondary, I honestly would probably have Tua as a sit at that point. I think this offense is just very centered around Tyreek Hill. If Hill's out, I really just wouldn't trust Tua as a fantasy option. If Tyreek Hill does play, I think he's a fringe option here against the Jets. In the next one, we're going to have the Giants taking on the Saints. Not a great matchup fantasy-wise at the quarterback position. Tommy DeVito, I mean, a great story. Fun to watch him and his family. Had a great game on Monday night. Do I want to play him for fantasy? No. But, it was an entertaining game, so good to see that. For the Saints here, Derek Carr, I mean, it seems like this dude is just pretty much broken at this point physically. They're still winning games, at least, they did in week 14, but definitely going to be a sit for me. Really hasn't been fantasy relevant in one quarterback leagues all season long. We're going to have the Texans taking on the Titans, and this Texans offense is just very banged up at this point. We lost Tank Dell for the season last week. In week 14, we have CJ Stroud in concussion protocol. Dalton Schultz missed another game. Nico Collins dealing with a calf injury. So this offense is kind of falling apart a little bit. If Stroud is cleared, I think he's a fringe option. Obviously, if Nico Collins is healthy, maybe you bump him up to a start. But there's just a lot of question marks at this point. So probably a situation we'll just have to kind of wait and see how it plays out over the rest of the week. And then for the Titans here, I am going to be sitting Will Levis. That other game was fun. Titans, Dolphins, Will Levis putting together, a nice comeback late in the game. Fantasy-wise, it still didn't lead to massive production. So he will be a sit for me, but I do think Will Levis is a very talented quarterback, and I think he's going to be an interesting fantasy option, heading into year 2 and beyond that. In the next one, we're going to have the Chiefs taking on the Patriots. For Patrick Mahomes here, I'm going to have him as a start. Obviously, the weapons around him are going to be letting him down here. I still think he's relevant as like a top probably 10 quarterback this week. Patriots defense has been tough, but I think Mahomes will be fine. Pretty much what he's produced so far this season, so in line with that. And then for the Patriots here, Bailey Zappi had the nice game on Thursday night. I have zero interest in firing him up for fantasy. Would not expect a repeat of that. And this Chiefs defense has been very tough. In the next one, we have a divisional matchup between the 49ers and the Cardinals. For the 49ers, Brock Purdy just continues to deal, surrounded by stud weapons, and a pretty solid matchup here against the Cardinals. Got to feel good about that. For the Cardinals here, Kyler Murray, since returning from the ACL, has been solid fantasy-wise. He hasn't necessarily been giving you that like elite QB1 production that would make me super confident playing him against this tough 49ers defense. So I still think he's playable as like a fringe option, but he's going to be more like that back-end QB1, high-end QB2 option. Next is going to be the Commanders taking on the Rams. And I actually have both of these quarterbacks as starts. Sam Howell has been a solid like top 10 quarterback on a point per game basis fantasy-wise. So I definitely think he's a start. For the Rams here, Matthew Stafford has been very impressive over the last 3 weeks, and this is a prime matchup here going up against the Commanders. I think Stafford can put together a really nice fantasy day, coming off back-to-back games against tough defenses with the Ravens and the Browns that he's played very well in. Another very strong quarterback matchup here with the Cowboys taking on the Bills. Dak Prescott's just been dealing. You fire him up as a very strong start. Josh Allen, he's going to be a locked-in high-end QB1 every single week. Even in a tough matchup here against the Cowboys, definitely still firing him up. And then we're going to keep the train rolling here with these strong quarterback options in the Ravens-Jaguars matchup. For the Ravens, Lamar Jackson's coming off a huge game. You fire him up with a lot of confidence here against the Jaguars. And then for Trevor Lawrence here, I considered a fringe option just due to the tough matchup. He came back after missing 0 games with that ankle injury, which seemed like pretty improbable, especially when you saw him go down. I ended up listing him as a start. I just think he's been playing very well over the past 3-4 weeks. We just saw Matthew Stafford put up a solid fantasy game, so I do think Trevor Lawrence is relevant as like a solid starting quarterback option this week fantasy-wise. And then the final game of the week, the Eagles taking on the Seahawks. For the Eagles here, I'm still firing up Jalen Hurts. This Eagles offense has struggled over the past couple of weeks, but the Seahawks defense is just not comparable to what they've seen with the 49ers and the Cowboys. So fine going back to the well here with Jalen Hurts. And then for the Seahawks, I actually have both Geno Smith and Drew Lock as fringe options. We saw Geno Smith miss the Week 14 game. Drew Lock stepped in. Wasn't terrible, especially when you consider his matchup against the 49ers. This is obviously a very juicy matchup for the quarterbacks and wide receivers here for the Seahawks. So if Geno's healthy, good enough to go, I think he's a fine fringe option. I kind of feel the same way about Drew Lock. I think he's going to go out there. He's going to sling it. He'd probably be like a mid to high end QB2 option for me. Someone who could be like a sneaky waiver wire pickup if you are desperate at the quarterback position. And that's going to wrap it up for all of the Week 15 QB matchups. Hopefully this helps you figure out your quarterback position. I'm going to have the running backs, wide receivers, and tight end start sit videos all out today also. So thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.